In today's vlog, I am going to be doing something very, very exciting. I am going to be rereading the Hunger Games original trilogy for the first time in honestly 10 plus years. I think by the time you're seeing this, it will actually be the week of Sunrise on the Reaping's release, so that is super exciting. And so to celebrate, I am doing a reread that is going to be full of spoilers, so do be warned that this vlog is not going to hold anything back when it comes to the original Hunger Games trilogy. I hope that this will be a fun vlog for me. I remember that I was such a Hunger Games girly when I was a tween and teen. I was an Everlark shipper to my core. I still love them. And I honestly think that Peeta is one of my favorite characters of all time. I don't know if that's a hot take or not, but I just love him. I think it'll be interesting to look back on this series now with an adult perspective. So, enough dilly-dallying, let's get right into the reread. I've read over 100 pages of the Hunger Games for my reread, and I do think it is very exposition heavy at the beginning. There is like a lot of backstory and explaining the world, but we kind of got past that part now and are more into just the actual, action of the story. And one of the things that is, I'm going to say, amusing about this book on a reread is how Katniss is sort of like an unreliable narrator. Now, she's not an unreliable narrator in the fact that she is intentionally lying or deceiving you. That's not what I mean. But her reads about people are sometimes very off, and so she's presenting this to you because she believes it to be correct. As someone who is rereading this and actually knows what is going on, I know that she's wrong. Like, what is so amusing to me is how she totally is adamant that, like, Peeta is secretly the super manipulative guy and that, like, everything he's doing is for strategy. And maybe part of that is just her wanting to believe that because that makes what's coming, or what she thinks is coming, easier for her. But it's just so funny to me because she is constantly thinking about how Peeta is putting on an act. Like, oh, it even starts when they're leaving District 12 to go to the Capitol, and he's crying, and she thinks he's crying to appear weak as a strategy. I'm like, girl, no, he's just sad. And so it's just really funny knowing that Peeta is actually just a really good guy, how she thinks that all these things he's doing are strategy for the games, like trying to appear weak, trying to use his quote-unquote feelings for her as a strategy, trying to be nice to Haymitch. Like, she thinks that he's helping clean Haymitch up after Haymitch throws up on himself, because she's like, well, maybe then Peeta thinks that if he helps Haymitch, Haymitch will like him more, and then he'll give him better training than he's gonna give me. And I'm like, no, sis, Peeta's just a cinnamon roll of a man. He's just wonderful. I think obviously if you're a first-time reader, you're going to trust her and probably trust her reads more. Like, if she says that Peeta's being manipulative, you're going to be a little suspicious and be like, is he being manipulative? But none of it is true. So I think she's a really good example of an unreliable narrator who's not outright lying, but is just presenting you, the reader, with information that they, the narrator, believe is fact. So to be an unreliable narrator doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be outright deceptive. Sometimes characters just have misbeliefs and preconceived notions that impact their narration of the story, but they themselves believe these things. It's just like so funny to me how she's convinced that Peeta is like secretly this super manipulative, calculated guy, and I'm like, nah, he's just a cinnamon roll, okay? He's just that nice. He's just nice, like, and he's in love with you. He's just a nice boy who's in love with you, and you can't see it. Reread. That's where I'm at. She's dead. And that's about where in the story I am. I have made good progress on reading this first book so far. I think I'll be done soon. One thing that I did want to say is it's interesting. Let's use the word interesting. How this book describes Rue as being not white. Obviously, it doesn't use a word for a specific ethnicity because this universe, like Suzanne Collins has described it, as people are more ethnically ambiguous just due to the passage of time. But when they casted the Hunger Games films, there was so much outrage over the fact that they made Rue black. But like, she's canonically not white. So like, maybe people who are outraged should like do some self-reflection on why they felt that way, though that's probably asking for too much. So this is very interesting. And now, as a much older person than when I first read these, I think it is a very deliberate choice that Rue and Thresh are both described as people of color, and District 11 is referenced multiple times in this series as being a very heavily policed district. I think that's a very intentional piece of social commentary because this country has such a problem with police brutality, especially against Black individuals. But I definitely think there is a lot of really apt social commentary in this series that I totally was not picking up on as a child, but now, in hindsight, it's just so obvious. We'll revisit this conversation, particularly when we get to Catching Fire, because I have some thoughts. He is everything. He is an icon. We'll love him forever and ever. I don't know a better man. Oh my god. He's looking at her with love, and she's just like, wow, he's so great at acting. Last night, I finished my Hunger Games reread, and all in all, it was really good. The ending was a little bit more intense than I remembered, and I did enjoy it overall. This has been my first reread of this book in a very long time. I do really enjoy the Hunger Games film adaptations. I actually think they are really good adaptations, and I've watched them multiple times. But I did want to say that there is one thing that I really wish they had kept in the films, which is Peeta losing his leg at the end of the first games, because obviously that is disability representation that we don't get a lot of, and I think it would have been nice to keep that. I feel like it makes it a little more realistic and drives home the stakes that he actually has permanently lost a limb, and I do think it really shows the strength of his character to me. I mean, one complaint I do have about the films is I think they took out some of Peeta's badass moments in the films and made him at times appear a bit weaker than he actually is, but he literally goes through an entire second Hunger Games missing a leg and makes it out alive. One thing they added in the films that I really liked is how at the end of the first film, as punishment, Seneca Crane, the game maker, is locked into a room with only the poisonous berries. I think that scene is so good. It like gives me chills. So that is one change they made that I personally thought was really well done. So I really enjoyed this reread. I flew through it, but now I need to start Catching Fire, and I'm going to start this today because I'm actually going to a silent book club. So basically what a silent book club is a group of people get together and they all silently read their own individual books. So it's not necessarily like a book club where there's assigned reading. It's just a way for a bunch of introverts to get together and read their books silently. So it's kind of like a social activity, but more introvert friendly. So since I'm doing this vlog, I'm going to take this book with me and start it. I don't remember when I first read The Hunger Games. I think because this book is in paperback and my other two are in hardcover, I do think I read this one closer to when it was actually released. So what was the date for this? This says copyright 2009. Was I 10 reading this? Maybe 11? Maybe I was 11? I don't know, man. In hindsight, I'm like, was I really 11 reading about children killing each other? One random memory that I do have about getting the Hunger Games book is I got this when I was in middle school for Christmas, and I was at that age where I had kind of like stopped believing that Santa was real, right? But my mom didn't want to like tell me that Santa wasn't real. She wanted me to come to that conclusion on my own. So Santa bought me this book, and actually my mom just bought it for me because she really wanted to read it when I was done. So she told me that Santa bought this for me, and that she was like, oh, I actually really wanted to read that book, so luckily that Santa got it for you. I can read it when you're done. And I was like, Mom, I know that you bought this.
That's great though, to be that old and still have that energy.
I do remember that when I was first reading this series as a middle schooler, Catching Fire was my least favorite book, which I think might be a hot take. I think a lot of people like this one the most, but I think the reason that I liked it the least was because the beginning of it just doesn't have as much action. So on page, I think it's 174, that's when we find out that Katniss is going back into the Hunger Games. And so obviously the book, I think, is really going to pick up from here, and we're going to meet a lot of great characters like Finnick and Joanna. Joanna did get name dropped in book 1, which stood out to me on this reread. I think the reason it was my least favorite is because of that first 170 pages. I do think, having just read them, the 170 pages do have lots of good parts, but yeah, I think I can see why this was my least favorite, and we'll definitely have to see if I feel that way after I've reread the entire trilogy. I know there's a whole bunch of people who talk about like the Bonnie and Twill subplot in Catching Fire and are like, oh, I wish that was in the movie, but I just read that whole part about Bonnie and Twill, and I feel like it's good that it's not in the movie. I think I actually prefer in the movie how it is trimmed down a little bit just to the more essential plot points, because it is that's a lot of page count. I also had to witness Katniss kissing Gale, which, nah. I was never a Gale girly, okay? I was always a Peeta girl, and I just don't personally get the appeal of Gale. Personally, that's just my opinion. I don't even know if the Hunger Games is like a true love triangle, because Katniss really is not thinking about dating that much throughout the series. Understandable, like, she has more important things to deal with, but, you know, jokingly, I'm gonna say that, listen, if it were me, okay, there would be no love triangle, because, like, one of these men bakes bread, the other one doesn't. That's all you need to know. I'm joking, but also not, because, yeah, the sexiest thing a man can do is bake bread. Wait. Finnick is literally younger than me? Oh my god! Oh no. Oh no. You know, I feel like when you're reading this book and you're 11, you don't realize how young a 16-year-old is, because when you're 11, a 16-year-old sounds old, and now I'm reading this and I'm 26, and I'm like, wait, Finnick, who is gonna be dead soon, is younger than me. Because when you're 11, somebody in their 20s seems like an adult. And then you're actually in your 20s, and you're like, a 24-year-old is a baby. Yikes on bikes. Wow. I also think it's so telling how when she's snuggling with Peeta here, Katniss thinks about, like, why shouldn't I? I'm not going to see Gale again. It can't hurt him. The reason that she feels like she needs to hold back from Peeta is because she doesn't want to hurt Gale's feelings. Like, that tells you something about how she really feels Because it's not that she doesn't want to do it. It's just she's worried Gale's going to be mad. And I don't think she ever really romantically loved him. I think it was more so like he was her best friend. And so there were a lot of confusing feelings around that because she knew how he felt about her. I think it's also going to be really interesting to reread this part because these are the games that we're going to see play out in their own book very, very soon. I forgot about this part. Oh. Wow. I'm like grinning because Peeta's most iconic moment is coming up. Can't wait. I'm cackling. Oh, Peeta, if it weren't for the baby Mellark, oh my god. All jokes aside, I have thoughts about this. This moment is so genius, and I did not appreciate it at the time. Look at this cutie patootie! Oh. Did you guys know that her name is Buttercup because of the Hunger Games? Yes, that's why that's your name, sweetie. It was my mom's idea. And she's a sweet buttercup. Yes, you are. I love you. A couple of quick things to follow up on what I was saying last night as I was reading. Well, one, like I said, I do think when I was younger, Catching Fire was my least favorite, which is a hot take. And I do think it's because of some parts in the beginning that I found a little slow. And I was thinking about this last night, and I think one of the reasons that I don't love the beginning of Catching Fire as much is because it does go on a bit long, and there are things that happen there that don't really get a payoff. For instance, I was talking about how, you know, a lot of people in the fandom were like, oh, but the Bonnie and Twill storyline, why didn't they keep that? I personally don't care for that whole subplot involving Bonnie and Twill because we never see Bonnie and Twill again. There's never any, like, resolution to their story. We don't know what happened to them. Like, it's, I guess, presumably they died, but they're only in that one little section, and I just feel like you can completely remove that part from the story because there's not any payoff to that. It doesn't need to be there. And also, to a lesser extent, the whole thing with Thread, who is the new head peacekeeper in 12, the one who whips Gale so badly he nearly dies. Thread never reappears. And he's kind of just like a micro villain in that one part of the book, but he never actually like gets his comeuppance. I suppose it's implied that he does, but we never actually see him get what's coming to him. So again, it feels a little hollow for me because it's like, okay, we introduced this new micro villain, like I said, but he just is in this one part of this book, and then we never like circle back to him. So I feel like we're introducing these characters who don't really go anywhere. And I think that's kind of the issue that I have with it, is it's just there's things that happen that we never circle back to. I don't know if that makes sense as a criticism. I think that's kind of my issue with it. So I do actually like that the Catching Fire movie streamlined that part of the book. I think it's better in the movie. And then I also wanted to talk about Peeta's if it weren't for the baby moment, because this is one of my favorite moments in this entire trilogy, and it is so brilliant. I didn't understand as a child how brilliant it was, and I genuinely think that this scene is such perfect social commentary on the hypocrisy of America's pro-life movement. Personally, I don't even think they should be called pro-life because they're not really pro-life, they are pro-birth. And that's why I think this scene is so brilliant, because people will say that they stand for life, will do all these things to exercise control over women's bodies, to save unborn babies, but then they do not give a single shit what happens to those babies once they are actually brought into this world. So it is so perfect because we have all these people in the Capitol who literally watch teens kill each other on TV every year for entertainment. Children kill each other for entertainment. But yet the thought of Katniss being pregnant has them rioting in the streets. This perfectly encapsulates the pro-life movement, because pro-lifers in America will do everything to force you to give birth, but once your baby is born, they do not give a single shit what happens to it. They don't care if it's starving. They don't care if you have no place to live. They don't care if you're on food stamps. They don't care if your child dies in an easily preventable measles outbreak. They don't care if your child dies in a school shooting. And God forbid that kid grow up to be trans or gay, because then they won't be so pro-life anymore. They just want you to give birth, and then once the baby is born, they can pat themselves on the back saying, wow, I am so pro-life. And it doesn't matter what quality of life that child actually has. Obviously, Republicans are not yet forcing children to fight to death on television, but I feel like it is a very adept comparison, and kudos Suzanne, because this was genius. And listen, if you're gonna come into my comments outraged because I said this, or get mad at me for making things political, one, I don't want to hear it. Two, if you get mad at me for making this political, you need to work on your reading comprehension, because one, all reading is political, and two, these books in particular are extremely political. Don't come at me in the comments. I guess you can if you want, because it'll just boost the engagement on my videos. Really brilliant takedown of the pro-life movement. I could not see that as a child, but now I see it, and man, it's brilliant. Suzanne is brilliant, really. This moment, always gets me. Though it's actually interesting, because since I haven't read this book in so long, I remember the movie version more. But in this version, Finnick, apologizes to her, he knows what's about to happen, and then she just goes right, into the fog. Whereas in the film, he doesn't want her to go, he screams. Here, they both have already resigned themselves, to the fact that they will die for Katniss and Peeta to survive. Yeah, but man, it does get me. Mags. What an incredible lady. We should get a Mags prequel. That would be cool. I feel like we don't know a lot about her as a person, but she's got potential. Yeah, I would read that. So I did finish this, and now I'm on Mockingjay, the last one. I have to say, okay, I stand by my criticisms, or not criticisms, my reasons for not loving the first half of Catching Fire, but the ending of this book is so good. I understand why this is people's favorite, because the ending of it is so fantastic. I just flew through that part. And I think the other thing that's really great about Catching Fire as a book is we meet so many new characters who are just really great characters. I was thinking, as I was reading, if Suzanne Collins wanted to write a prequel about this character, I would read it. Or this character, I would read it. She just has a lot of really good characters that she introduces in this book. I mean, I would read a Mags prequel, I would read a Finnick prequel, I would read a Joanna prequel. I think that's really the main appeal of this book. But I don't know, it might be my least favorite. I might stand by that, but let's finish Mockingjay first. And also, it's really hard to rank a series where you do genuinely really enjoy all of the books. And ranking is also arbitrary, it's really not that big a deal. So then last night, I started Mockingjay, and I think I read exactly 100 pages. Yes, exactly 100 pages. I do think there are some aspects of the books that I have forgotten because they were different in the movies. And obviously I've rewatched the movies more recently than I've reread the books. So I forgot about the whole subplot involving Katniss's prep team in this. I forgot about the Darius plot in this one. So there are elements of it where, even though I've read these before, I was surprised because it's been so long since I read them. I just forgot about those parts. The Peeta hijacking part I am not looking forward to. That is gonna hurt, because I love him and he shouldn't feel pain ever. But so far, so good. We're in the home stretch now. This is the last book, and God, I'm having fun. I hope you're having fun. I just got to the Peeta hijacking part. What really gets me is seeing Katniss's thoughts about how excited she is to see Peeta, how glad she is that he's okay. She says, you know, in a minute I can touch him, see his smile, hear his laugh. And it's like, oh my god. He's not gonna laugh again for a long time. Damn. At least Plutarch is here with some much needed comedic relief right now. Good news, Katniss. I think we've almost got him convinced you're not a mutt. Okay, thanks for the laugh, Plutarch. I needed that right now. I was in my feels. I just had a thought just now as I'm folding my laundry, and I think this thought makes sense, so I wanted to share it with the vlog. So, I really am enjoying Mockingjay. One issue that I do have with it, if I'm going to give some kind of criticism, is I do think the part where they go to the Capitol and members of the team start dropping like flies, I don't feel like that is the most emotionally impactful because so many of them die at once and you really don't know a lot of those characters. Like League One, she doesn't even have a first name. Jackson, I don't know anything about Jackson. I was reading it and I was like, wait, Castor's dead? Where is the part in the scene where Castor dies exactly? I missed that. I literally went back to see if I could figure out when he died and I was still confused. But I'm tying this back to my criticism of Catching Fire, where I said I don't like the Bonnie and Twill subplot because Bonnie and Twill, we never see them again, and so it just felt irrelevant to me. What if? I think what should have happened is if they wanted to keep that part about Katniss meeting these refugees, either we should have like Bonnie and Twill then reappear in Mockingjay and be some of these characters who are on her team and who are going to die, or we should have used some of those characters and introduced them in Catching Fire. So later Katniss would meet them again, and then when they died, it would actually be a character who we've seen in 2 books and gotten to know a little bit more. I feel like this was a big brain moment when I thought this, because I think that would solve both of those issues. It would give the storyline of Katniss finding these people trying to escape in the woods. It would have given that plotline some relevance, and also would have made it more emotionally impactful when all of these characters are dying one by one. Giving this plotline some relevance and also giving this plotline more emotional impact. Yeah, I was proud of myself for that one. Hello, and I'm here to finish out my rereading the Hunger Games vlog. I finished Mockingjay, and honestly, this might be my favorite book in the trilogy. I know that's an unpopular opinion because this is many people's least favorite. I think it might be my favorite, but like I said before, ranking is arbitrary, and I do think all of the books in this series are really strong. Every single one of them I had issues with, but they were all really, really good reads, so it's hard to pick a favorite because I liked all of them. Any last thoughts about Mockingjay? I do think my biggest criticism of it is that the part where they're in the Capitol and all the members of the squad are dying didn't really hit for me in some instances because I didn't know a lot of these characters very well and they were all dying one on top of each other. So that's probably my biggest criticism. As for Finnick dying, I know a lot of people wish that he hadn't died, and it definitely is a very sad scene because he is one of my favorite characters in the series. But I don't necessarily hate that he died because I do think it's important to remember that whenever there is a war, there are a lot of people who die who didn't deserve to die, who had a lot to live for. And so I think it is accurate in that way. And I do think that Prim needed to die for the book to hit the way that it did because, I mean, really, when you think about Prim as a character, she is pretty flat. She doesn't have really any character flaws. She just exists to be Katniss's beloved, sweet sister. And I think there is something very tragic and very poetic about it, where Katniss started this journey not with the intention of leading a rebellion, but with the intention of saving her sister. And in the end, she started a rebellion but she couldn't save her sister. And so I think there is something very tragic and very well written and poignant about that, where her whole goal was to save her sister and ultimately she can't. Another thing that I want to say is I honestly don't understand how any of my friends in middle school were Team Gale. Girlies, Gale never had a chance. I honestly do not think that Katniss was ever really attracted to Gale in a romantic way, and it really wasn't much of a contest between him and Peeta. Obviously, throughout this entire series, Katniss is not in the right headspace to reflect on romance, understandably so. But I do think any romantic inclinations towards Gale that she might have had were more so out of obligation because he was her best friend. His friendship meant a lot to her. And she mentions multiple times that people expected them to grow up and get married someday. And maybe if the Hunger Games hadn't happened to her, she would have grown up to marry Gale. But I think if she had married him, it wouldn't have been because she desired him in a romantic or sexual way. It would have been because she felt like that was what she ought to do or what people expected of her. We also see Gale be very jealous on multiple occasions, and there are multiple instances where she is thinking, oh, I don't want Gale to see this. How's Gale going to react? And so I think a lot of times she is, whether she realizes it or not, acting in certain ways because she is worried about hurting her friend's feelings. Whereas with Peeta, we do see from the very first book that she does desire him in a romantic and sexual way, the hunger she feels for him as she describes it. Though at the time, she doesn't know exactly what that feeling is because she's a teenager. She has a lot going on, to say the least, and she's not necessarily familiar with those feelings of romantic and sexual desire. It's not something she's really experienced before. But it's very clear to me that her attraction to him started in the very first book. And even though she didn't really have the verbiage to name that feeling at the time or the desire to name that feeling, he was really always going to be the one for her. And the thing that's really interesting about Gale and Peeta is that they represent two opposing worldviews. So there's a symbolic meaning to their characters beyond just, ooh, love triangle. Because we see from the very first book that Gale has a much more fiery, angry personality. From the very first book, it's referenced that he would often rage against the Capitol and he wanted to see the Capitol fall. And in the end, we see him really struggle with empathy and relish in revolution in the violence. Like, for instance, when he has no sympathy for Katniss's prep team, and Katniss is trying to tell him, no, they're actually good people. I believe that they thought they were doing the right thing, and they were basically just influenced by this upbringing they had and the propaganda. I believe that they're actually good people and they thought they were helping me. But Gale is not sympathetic and is basically like, yeah, sure, they're good people. Gale much more buys into the us versus them mentality, and he has a lot of hatred towards the people that he sees as their oppressors, and that ultimately results in him contributing to the building of a bomb that targets a bunch of innocents. Whereas Peeta is a very kind hearted person with an optimistic worldview on humanity. He is inherently good and believes in the inherent goodness of the human species, believes that we are all born good and that nobody is beyond redemption. And so, really, by choosing Peeta, Katniss is choosing hope in the end. And this is a really interesting thing because it did cause me to do some self reflection as an adult who is witnessing the current times that we're living in with so much hatred and so much division. Because I do, as a person, also want to believe that humanity is inherently good. But I do think sometimes with all the hatred and division that goes on in our world today, it is very easy to lose sight of that belief and to lean more towards the Gale perspective of, seeing other people as your enemies and having a lot of resentment towards them. And I do, at my core, want to believe that all of humanity is born good and that nobody is beyond redemption. But I also think it's sometimes very hard to stay true to that belief when you witness all the things in our world today that you do. So it was kind of an interesting thing for me just to reflect on and think about how so many of the things touched on in this book are relevant towards the actual things that we are witnessing in society today. So it was a kind of interesting thing to think about as I was reading. And, I still don't have all the answers. I'm still not 100% sure about my beliefs regarding humanity, but it was kind of an interesting thought experiment. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I do want to be hopeful. And I feel like the recent events in my young adult life have caused me to lose hope in many ways. But, that is something that I am constantly striving to get back. Oh, and one more thing that I really, really wanted to say, and I feel strongly about this. I will die on this hill. I see so many people who hate the epilogue to the Hunger Games. And I 100% believe that the Hunger Games epilogue is a perfect ending to the series. And let me tell you why. I know a lot of people hate baby epilogues, they find them cheesy. And I see a lot of people who say, well, Katniss didn't want to be a mother, and so it's sending a bad message that she did end up becoming a mother. And I get that. I am not particularly maternal. I'm not sure that I ever want to have children, so I get that. It is totally valid to not want children, and we as a society should acknowledge that. However, I personally think that Katniss is a very maternal person. You see that in the way that she cared for Prim, in the way that she cared for Rue, in the way that she acts in other situations throughout the series. She does have a very compassionate side, and I do think some innately maternal qualities. I think the reason that all those years she didn't want to have children is because she did not allow herself to want them. She did not want to have children in a world where they could be sent into the games, where they couldn't be safe, where they would be starving, and where they would have to live through all these injustices. Think back to the conversation she has with Gale in book 1, where Gale says, I might want to have children if I didn't live here. And Katniss's reply is, well, you do live here. She has never allowed herself to think about that because she doesn't trust that the world she's in is safe for children. So I don't think it's an issue of her not wanting children, period. I think the epilogue symbolizes that after everything she's been through, she has finally allowed herself to have enough hope for the world to have children, to bring children into the world. And I think that is a very fitting ending to the series. I also see a lot of people who say that Peeta forced her into having children, which is like, what Peeta Mellark did you read about? Because Peeta would never force Katniss to do anything she didn't want to do. And also, Katniss is not the kind of person who would agree to have children if she didn't want to have children, okay? She's very stubborn. She would not give in easily. He didn't force her to do it. She just eventually, after these 15 years, felt like it was safe enough to do so. I also think this ending is the perfect example of a bittersweet ending because while Katniss and Peeta are able to grow old together, are able to have children together, they are never going to be the same people that they were before the games happened. Peeta's lost a leg. He was hijacked. He still struggles with having his flashbacks. And Katniss, she's always going to have PTSD. She is going to struggle with depression sometimes. But even though this is something that they're always going to struggle with, and it's always going to be something that happened to them, they are able to support each other and to build a better future for themselves in a better world. It's just a perfect ending. I will die on this hill. That's my take. If you're still here watching, why don't you leave a bird emoji down in the comment section? I honestly don't know if anybody will be interested in this vlog. It's so different from my other content, but I wanted to do this because I thought it would be fun. I had fun. Hopefully you did too. Please give this video a like if you enjoyed and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more from me. I post new videos every Wednesday with occasional Sunday uploads like this one. Thank you so much for watching and have a wonderful rest of your day. I'll talk to you soon.